and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin orders ceasefire in Ukraine over Orthodox Christmas. Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky scoffs at call for temporary truce, says Russia wants to use it to halt Ukraine's advances. The Pentagon in the United States is also skeptical over the Putin ceasefire. It says it will send Bradley combat vehicles to Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered a 36-hour ceasefire in Ukraine over the Orthodox Christmas, the first major truce of the more than 10-month-long war that has killed tens of thousands and devastated swathes of Ukraine. According to the Kremlin, Mr. Putin ordered the ceasefire to begin this morning. Many Orthodox Christians, including those living in Russia and Ukraine, celebrate Christmas on January 6th and 7th. Earlier, the Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, who is the head of the Russian Orthodox Church and also a close ally of Mr. Putin, called for both sides of the war in Ukraine to observe this Christmas truce. Russia's Orthodox Church observes Christmas on January the 7th. Ukraine's main Orthodox Church has rejected the authority of the Moscow Patriarch, and many Ukrainians are believed to have shifted their calendar, celebrating Christmas on December the 25th, as in the West. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said Russia was seeking a truce to use as a cover to stop Ukrainian advances in the eastern Donbas region and bring in more men and equipment. Ukraine spurned Mr. Putin's offer of a 36-hour ceasefire over Orthodox Christmas, saying there would be no truce until Russia withdraws its invading forces from occupied land. A genuine truce in Ukraine would be the first since May, when the sides halted intense fighting in the devastated port of Mariupol to allow Ukrainian forces to surrender there.
Everyone
in the world knows how the Kremlin uses respite in the war to continue the war with renewed vigor. And to end the war faster, something completely different is needed. The citizens of Russia must find the courage in themselves, at least for 36 hours, at least during Christmas, to free themselves from their shameful fear of one person in the Kremlin. Your fear of him is destroying your country, which is also already deep, but not in a bunker. To end the war is to end the aggression of your state, and the war will end either when your soldiers leave or we throw them out.
And as expected, reactions have also been pouring in from residents of the Ukrainian capital as they poured scorn on Russian President Vladimir Putin's call for an Orthodox Christmas truce, describing it as hypocrisy. 52-year-old Kievan Natalia Shoka dismissed the Kremlin's orders as utter hypocrisy. Another resident, Roman, age 33, said a Russian ceasefire was just a pretty candy wrapper which Russia uses to present itself as a country that wants to end the conflict without actually doing anything. Residents in the east of Ukraine also rejected Mr. Putin's 36-hour Christmas ceasefire. For Alexander, a 30-year-old Kramatorsk policeman, the ceasefire will only happen when Russia returns Crimea and Donbas. Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak had tweeted that Russia must leave the occupied territories. Only then will it have a temporary truce, wanting Russia to keep its hypocrisy to itself. In a more detailed statement to the media, Mr. Podolyak said Mr. Putin's proposal was purely a propaganda gesture. He said Russia, which invaded Ukraine last February, wanted to secure additional time to reduce the intensity of military clashes and regroup, mobilize additional forces, and continue to build fortifications on territory it has occupied. Let's hear from the United States, where the President Joe Biden says Russian President Vladimir Putin is trying to find some oxygen by floating a 36-hour ceasefire. He was speaking to reporters at the White House when asked about Moscow's truce proposal.
respond to anything Putin says. I found it interesting. He was ready to bomb hospitals and nurseries and churches, and on the 25th and New Year's, and I mean, you know, I think he's trying to find some oxygen.
Meanwhile, the Pentagon says the world was deeply skeptical about Russian President Vladimir Putin's call for a 36-hour ceasefire in Ukraine. Also on Thursday, the United States and Germany announced that they were sending armored fighting vehicles to Ukraine, ramping up military support for Kiev to repel Russian forces after a similar move by France earlier in the week. The U.S. weapons package to be announced today is expected to include about 50 Bradley fighting vehicles as part of security assistance totaling about $2.8 billion.
I do have several things to pass along at the top, so I appreciate your patience in advance, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. Understandably, I think that there's significant skepticism, both here in the U.S. and around the world right now, given Russia's long track record of propaganda, disinformation, and its relentless attacks against Ukrainian cities and civilians. So, of course, from our perspective, if Russia was truly interested in ceasing the violence and the bloodshed that they have brought to Ukraine's people, they would pull out of Ukraine immediately and end this war altogether right now. But it appears that will not be the case, so our focus will continue to be on supporting Ukraine with its security assistance needs. In terms of what the Bradleys bring, it is obviously an armored capability that can transport mechanized infantry into battle in support of both offensive and defensive operations, providing a level of firepower and armor that will bring advantages on the battlefield as Ukraine continues to defend their homeland. Well, again, as you look at the battlefield and you look at how this fight has evolved from the early days, you know, of the artillery barrages to air defense to largely being static along that front line, providing this capability provides both an offensive and a defensive capability to the Ukrainians to be able to change the equation on the battlefield. And so we are going to continue to talk closely with them about what they need. We're going to continue to look at the situation on the ground and do what we can do that's going to help them the most.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the peace in war-torn Ukraine is still not on the horizon, and the talks between Moscow and Kiev to bring the conflict to an end were not possible yet. Speaking to media at an event in Portugal where he received the University of Lisbon 2020 prize, Mr. Guterres said the key at present was doing everything to lessen the impact of the war. His comments come after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan told Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier that Ankara was ready to take on mediation and moderation duties to secure a peace between both countries.
It is my belief that we are still far from a moment in which a serious peace negotiation is possible. At the present moment, I think it's important to do everything we can in order to minimize the negative impact of the war. I think we are still not in a situation where we can see peace in the immediate horizon. Peace that we believe will have to come one day, and peace based on the UN Charter and international law.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Let's talk to Victoria Serreira, Senior Fellow, Forum of Transregional Studies, Senior Researcher at the National Academy of Science in Ukraine. She's joining us virtually from Berlin in Germany. Good morning to you, Victoria, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Good morning.
There are two major things happening almost simultaneously. There's more military aid for Ukraine from the United States and France and Germany. We'll get to that in a moment, but I want to start with this truce that President Putin is offering over the Orthodox Christmas holiday, which is supposed to be today and tomorrow. Ukraine has said no, and its allies have said no as well. But a truce, by definition, is not an end to the war. It's simply to allow people to go out and go to religious institutions in peace and safety. Why do you think everybody is so skeptical about that over the next 36 hours?
First of all, we have to understand that Ukraine is one of the few countries in the neighborhood which does not have state religion. So Orthodoxy is not a state religion, and we have around 120 different religions or religious affiliations in Ukraine registered. People are going to very different religious institutions, or we have two different Orthodox churches, we have two different Catholic churches, we have Muslim population, and many more. We have a lot of Protestants, and this means that we do not have the state holiday. We don't have the only Orthodox Christmas happening, for example, like it is in Russia, or in between 6th and 7th January. In this sense, Ukraine was gradually switching, and we do have Christmas holidays both on 25th of December and on the 7th of January. So we do observe both dates because we have believers from different churches which observe different Christmas Eves. And for Ukraine, it was very important to have a possibility, if Russia is open to this Christmas truce, then we needed this Christmas truce happening both on 25th and now. But if you remember, you wished us a peaceful Christmas in December, but it was not happening. There were shellings on 24th and 25th and during the New Year Eve. So Russia was not respecting Ukrainian religious plurality, and now it wants Ukraine to respect Russian Orthodox Christmas. And also, if we look at the statistics, then those believers who are celebrating Christmas in Ukraine these days are now almost in minority. We have approximately 40 to 44% of people celebrating different dates. So it would be for us very important to observe both Christmas truces if Russia wanted to have a humanitarian step. Another question is that Russia is constantly shelling Ukrainian religious institutions like churches and mosques and other religious buildings, and a lot of civilian infrastructure. During the New Year Eve, Kyiv University was hit. So we do have a lot of civilian infrastructure, and again, power station hit during this celebration period in Ukraine. So why should Ukraine believe Russia and trust only to Russian Orthodox celebration?
This is a very detailed explanation that I'm sure many of our viewers do not have about the situation in Ukraine. So I'm very glad that you expatiated on that. And now coming to the military assistance that I talked about earlier, the week has been one of significant changes in tone as well as in actual deeds. France has promised actual fighting equipment this time, so has Germany. And then, of course, we're hearing now that the United States is also going to send 50 Bradley vehicles as part of the latest military assistance. Why do you think there is a change of tone now, and some of the countries that were quite reluctant to actually send these kinds of equipment in the first place are now willing to do so now?
I guess because they see that what is constantly happening, that Russia never stops shelling Ukrainian cities, and we do have a humanitarian, very problematic, strong humanitarian issues in Ukraine, even during, as we said, during the festive periods, during the Christmas, and we have winter now, so a lot of people are suffering from power cuts, from absence of water supply, gas supply, electricity supply. And previously, many countries thought that Russia would observe certain military rules. And in this sense, they realize that Ukraine needs much more support because those who are suffering are mostly civilians. And sending this armor helps to save civilian lives and help civilians to survive this winter.
Given that scenario, I want to come to the faces and the people. Very often, we spend a lot of time discussing the issues and the broad points, but very often we don't zero down on the people. After all, they're the ones who bear the brunt of all of this. You are talking to us from Berlin, Germany. I know that you'd rather be talking to us from Ukraine yourself, but you're in Berlin, Germany for a reason. And that's the same reason that probably millions of other Ukrainians are outside the country. What is it like now? You've referenced the fact that there was shelling, there were attacks, significant attacks over the Christmas and New Year holidays. What is it like on the ground today from what those who are yours back in Ukraine are telling you?
It's the big issue is that a lot of villages or countryside places are cut off electricity to supply cities. And also biggest cities have very short periods of time when they have electricity. And if infrastructure is hit, then it's even longer that they stay in almost complete blackouts. Which creates situations in majority of cases then you do not have heating, you don't have running water, and you cannot move through the city because public transport is not working, and then a lot of issues with hospital supplies of electricity, because these are not urgent needs that need to be supported, but a lot of people have plenary scheduled routines which cannot be supported if there is no electricity, and businesses and shops are closed. So in this sense, it's very difficult to live through the winter under such conditions. And also, I guess another important issue why gradually Western allies are supplying more of fighting armor to Ukraine, that we observe that peace talks are not really possible. And they start to realize that this will be a protracted conflict, which will take much longer than expected. And that Ukraine will need this armor to defend itself from Russia. Even those grain deals are not really working because there are a lot of Ukrainian ships which are standing in queues and they cannot pass because Russia doesn't allow this or slows down the whole process. So even those small bits of cooperation which were negotiated are not really working. And yesterday there was a phone call between the president of Turkey and Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin suggested that yes, he is ready to a peace talk, but his condition is that Ukraine accepts the territories which are occupied now to be part of Russia and Russian conditions, and then he's ready for deep talks.
That, of course, as we have been told repeatedly, is a non-starter with the Ukrainians. But I want to then ask you this final question. If indeed there are, like the Turkish president said, he's prepared to mediate and moderate between Ukraine and Russia, he's the only one who has indicated this, that is actually serious, and who has the goodwill from both sides to moderate this. How would you suggest that he could go about it in such a way that Ukraine could find it possible to participate?
As we just heard in the interview by UN head, that he said that there is an international law, and Russia has to observe international law. So it's not that Ukraine demands something specific. It's the question of observation of international law. But I do believe that what Turkey is doing is extremely important, because at least it keeps dialogue in between the sides, and each side can voice what are their key points. And in this sense, probably gradually we will be approaching some ceasefire or peace talks. But as I said, even with this grain deal, it was negotiated, but it's not working. And quite often we had this in the previous times. Then if Russia something negotiates, they do not keep to what they agreed upon.
Indeed, it does appear as if the trust deficit continues to be quite wide between Russia and Ukraine. Victoria Seredia, thank you so much for your time on the program this morning, and do stay safe.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
And after the break, UN chief disbands fact-finding mission into Ukraine prison attack. Please join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric says the UN Secretary General has disbanded a fact-finding mission into a July attack in the frontline Ukrainian town of Olenivka that killed prisoners held by Moscow-backed separatists because the UN mission cannot deploy to the site. Russia and Ukraine both requested an investigation, which Mr. Guterres had announced in August.
Disband his fact-finding mission regarding the 29 July 2022 incident at Olenivka in Ukraine in the absence of conditions required for the deployment of the mission to the site. The establishment of the fact-finding mission, as you know, had been announced on August 3rd, following requests from the governments of Ukraine and the Russian Federation. The Secretary General reiterates his call for full respect of international humanitarian and human rights law, including the protection of and treatment of prisoners of war. Christmas represents a holy period for both Russians and Ukrainians. The possibility that this holy period be respected with a cessation of all hostilities is always welcome by the Secretary General, knowing that this will not replace a just peace in line with the UN Charter and international law. No Polina, I think, till next week.
In another development, the leaders of the United States and Germany have announced that they are sending armored fighting vehicles to Ukraine, ramping up military support for Kiev to repel Russian forces after a similar move by France earlier in the week. In a joint statement after a call between President Joe Biden and Chancellor Olaf Scholz, the United States said it would provide Ukraine with Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, while Germany would provide Marder infantry fighting vehicles as well. The statement adds that both countries agreed to train Ukrainian soldiers on how to use them, while Germany would also supply a Patriot air defense battery to Ukraine, which has scored some battlefield successes since Russian forces invaded last February, but has asked allies for heavier weapons to defend itself. The decision was announced after Mr. Scholz's government faced a chorus of calls from within his three-way coalition to beef up military support for Ukraine after France announced it was sending light AMX-10 RC armored combat vehicles to the country. Let's talk now to Major General Augustin Agundu, military strategist and analyst, just former commander of Operation Safe Haven. Good morning to you, General. Thank you for coming.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
I don't want to say I can see you rubbing your hands, but fighting vehicles, Bradley fighting vehicles, Marder fighting vehicles, what do these do in battle?
They mainly aid troops to objectives. They are also protective in nature, and they give you a kind of added advantage. It's like reducing the collateral on the part of troops. It gives them a lot of protection while they move into battle. So, and again, the weapon systems to aid what they have, because these
so these vehicles also have their
added
own
weapon systems on them.
So, in terms of the conflict in Ukraine, is this possible that these additions could make much of a difference for Ukraine?
We do know, equipment alone do not win wars. There is the men behind the equipment that do the devastating effects as it be expected. No matter the number of equipment you launch into battle, you should also expect equipment casualty. You should also expect some kind of inefficiency on the part of the operating men. And in the case of Ukraine, we see, I don't know how much they are quite acquainted with these types of vehicles, because they have been used to Warsaw Pact type of weapon systems. Now they are getting NATO type of weapon systems. So it requires a lot of training and retraining before they can master or grow some level of expertise to operate these vehicles that they are getting. No matter the quantum that is launched into them, if you are not efficient on these vehicles, it's of no use.
So in terms of the kind of military support, because before we came on and we were chatting, I was talking about the HIMARS systems, the Patriot systems, and so on. And one of the things that you said is that even though that could provide some level of advantage, but the troops who are going to use them have to be trained.
Absolutely.
And that time lag may also affect the war negatively on the side of those who have even received these weapons.
Now, with this number of weapons being launched into battle, now the next thing that comes to my mind as a military man, as a general, is how much more time do we have on this battle? It's going to be elongated as it is. There is no sight of when this battle will come to an end, and it makes it more difficult. It makes it more difficult because of the huge humanitarian disaster we already have at hand. Now, these weapon systems, they are modern weapon systems. I do not know, I'm not sure if Ukrainians have had this in their inventory before. Now, if you go, for an instance, the Patriot systems that they are being shipped in and all whatnot, it requires as much as 100 men to man
each Patriot defense system.
Each. And it comes with a lot of other components, about 3 different components. And these are, now if we take our mortars, which we have in our inventory, when we go for mortar training at whatever level, whether as officers or soldiers, you see, it takes us like 12 weeks, 16 weeks to train on mortars. Now, if you are introducing or inducting these modern, high caliber, high technologically advanced systems into this, how much more time do we require to train? I don't call them novice, but in this instance, these
people are new.
They are new.
People are almost exclusively totally new.
That's right. So it calls for worries. Then what happens about the maintenance of the troubleshooting? Are you going to say that we have some other foreign partners manning the vehicles for them to be able to get on the target and all whatnot? Like if we are reading up some of what has happened, the latest developments so far, you see that some of the casualties that the Russians suffered is as a result of having been traced through their mobile phones.
That's right.
And so you see the technology is becoming more challenging to man. So it means even some chips on you, these modern weapon systems can locate you out and then do a lot of effect. And do not forget, these systems will also have a command post, which is another component entirely That is not part of, it's not in the forefront of the war. So the best that we can do, or the world can do, if it is that the international community, they do teach us anything at all, is that let there be some stop.
Indeed. I mean, I think everybody would value a great deal of stop, because that would then mean the civilians can get a breather, if you like. But now, if you look at the situation, as it were, on the ground, I'm happy you referenced the fact that if you look at it as a general commanding troops on the ground. Now, you've got the Ukrainians who are getting this military support, even though, as you point out, its impact will not be immediately visible because there's still a time lag between supply and capacity to use.
Absolutely.
Now, you take a look at the Russians, who, by all accounts, if you like, particularly from the Western media, have suffered a couple of military losses, but are still throwing in huge quantities of missiles into Ukraine. The battle has kind of shifted from the ground to the air, because the Patriots defense system we're talking about, the HIMARS and so on, these are all air defense systems. Is that a change based on what's going on the ground?
Now, let me take you backwards. You see, by nature, human beings, we are destructive in nature. We are, when there is no war, we create one. If we go back the years when we had the First World War, it was like a battle of the trenches, if you do know them. Now, if we go to the Second World War, it was a battle of the tanks. Then there was this manufacturing tanks and some low-level aircraft. Now, we had a period of Cold War, which was a battle of the mind. Now it graduated that way until we came to situations of peacekeeping, which was mainly in Africa and all those things. Then we now got into trouble situations, an epidemic battle. Now what we are seeing is an evolution of minds, whereby we have now battles of flying projectiles, rockets and systems, and countermeasures and counter air defense systems and counter. So, and it gets me worried. What next?
Okay, what next?
Yes, what type of war are we going to next? Is the world going to experiment, perhaps, the tactical nuclear type? So we are always evolving, looking for how to destroy ourselves. Because at the end of the day, like we do know, every battle has ended up on the table. So why don't we start on the table? But we know that in international relations, what matters is the interest of the individual countries. There's something at stake. Now, the level of this devastation that we have seen in Ukraine, bringing it back home must give us cause for concern. For those of us who are beating the drums of war, who have never tasted it, it is not a table talk. These are real devastations that take lives, infrastructures, and everything. And like we did discuss the last time, the problem is going to be the cleanup. After everything, certainly we must come to the discussion table. Diplomacy must take place. We must look for political solutions to all this. Then how do we do the cleanup exercises? How many years is it going to do to clean up Ukraine? And can you clean up the mines that have been broken? So these are avoidable things whereby whatever is the concerns of each and every party to this conflict should be able to be discussed. So that is a take-home for us. And again, I also, looking at the quantum of weapon system being shipped into the, let's not forget, Ukraine is a weapon-producing nation. So that means no nation can go into war on its own. You need to prepare your country, your home front, to go into war. And at the same time, you must prepare the men, their mind and everything, and we must all agree Because this here is not the military that is at war, is the political leadership that
the country
that is at war, pursuing their own individual national interests. So it is critical, and it brings to mind the invention we have been able to do within the Nigerian army, for an instance. And of course, the Air Force has been able to do a lot of inventions to help in our own equipment stocking and all whatnot. So we see where we have this, our Ezugu MRAPs. Now, this is a success story, and the production has gone to advanced stage. So, and I know that there are plans to now go into other variants of that, so that we can start being self-sufficient in our own equipment acquisition. Then at a level that if we do need help, then it should be
help.
It should be help, not that we don't have any at all. In that stage.
Indeed, a lesson, a very deep lesson for us to learn. Major General Augustine Agundu, thank you so much for coming in. Compliments of the season. I forgot to say that at the start.
It's a pleasure.
Happy New Year. Thank you so much for being.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being with us. And when we return, Ukraine's economy shrank by more than 30% in 2012. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. All right, thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Laddie Williams, as usual, joins us at this point in time. But I just got to say this. This will come as no surprise to you. Ukraine's economy shrank by more than 30%. That's about a third in 2022. That should not come to you as a surprise. Because yesterday you were talking about you were talking about what had happened in Ukraine. But let's take a look somewhat at why.
So there's a surprise in there, though, because analysts and experts actually expected between 40 to 50% contraction.
Okay.
You know, but we didn't see that.
They didn't do as bad as expected.
So it's not as bad as expected, which is a good thing, even though, you know, a contraction of 30% is obviously
it's really
huge.
rough.
Yeah, it's rough for any economy, you know, to drop 30%, even though we've had the drums of recession, you know, all through 2022, and we're in 2023 now, and the drums of recession, you know, still raging high. So at this point, what really, you know, helped the Ukrainian economy, even though it's still a bad, you know, outing, but still better than expected, all the, you know, support they got from international partners. The financial support was quite incredible, and it did, you know, help them, you know, restore some damaged critical infrastructure. You know, we saw they had millions of Ukrainians, you know, going without heating and water. You know, so all that, you know, support really helped, and also support from and the defense, you know, angle also helped the economy actually, you know, stand strong at 30%, even though it's a 30% contraction. So it's quite interesting, you know, obviously, because at the end of the day, this is a war. This is an economy that's, you know, battling hard, you know, to stay afloat, and obviously war is not easy. And for them to still be able to run their banking system, you know, correctly, the government's still able to collect taxes from, you know, citizens. Well, we might as well just, you know, clap for them.
Clap for them, give them a bit of an applause.
Even though it's a 30% contraction.
Indeed. Now, the war is bringing inflation to places that probably did not know the word before now. I see here that Kazakhstan is one of, and incidentally, Kazakhstan is an oil-producing country.
Oh, yes.
So what's going on there?
It was actually a big, you know, inflation, over 20%, and the last time they had that level of inflation was in 1996, really long time. And obviously, it's quite interesting that when you know, Putin was trying to mobilize his citizens to, you know, join the Russian army, you know, a lot of them,
had to flee.
That's
and
right.
Where did they go?
Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, incidentally.
And all of that demand, from the migration shock, took up the real estate. The demand was high, for people trying to, move there and actually, start a new life.
So
we saw real estate actually shoot up. And we also saw consumer good prices actually go up too. So it's more like, people coming in, driving up, all the inflation from rising consumer goods and, the real estate, as I said. So it's kind of inflation by association, if I may call it that.
That would be a good way to put it,
yes.
really, because it is by association.
Exactly. So,
but if you take a look at that and link that, go to a place like Germany.
Right.
We've talked about Germany and all the attempts to cushion, energy supplies in particular. But it's coming now as, for me, it's a surprise, that Germany exported more electricity than it imported last year.
Quite a big surprise, because I remember in 2022, the projections were, the German economy is going to, come to a halt.
Right.
Russia has turned off the gas, the taps, so at the end of the day, they're not going to be able to get any gas. And obviously the winter is coming. Winter is going to be harsh. But the winter, didn't turn out to be harsh.
Yeah, it wasn't.
We've seen natural gas prices actually slump, because of that.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's quite interesting because they were able to export about 27.5 terawatt hours, compared to 20.8 terawatt hours in 2021. That's their energy and that's power export, from Germany. But we got a big demand. They got big demand, from France because, France were having issues with their reactors.
Absolutely.
So that drove up, demand for German power. They also got a lot of exports to countries like Austria and Switzerland, so that, played into, their exports of power. And in turn, they ended up importing even less, electricity, which is quite incredible because this is an economy that's, battling with gas issues.
Yeah.
But thankfully, they were able to work out that LNG floating
the regasification plants that they
terminal
brought on board.
So that's, they made, big moves, even though we had gloomy forecasts, for the energy sector. So it's remained resilient. It's quite, good for the economy, for the German economy. And obviously the outlook for 2023 is that the issues are still there. But since they were resilient in 2022, it should be easier
to go on with that
in 2023.
Indeed. And finally, as we end the week, how are the markets doing?
Yeah, so obviously U.S. investors didn't get it. They didn't get it good this week. Yeah, it's been rough data. Even though it's supposed to be good data, they got that payroll data yesterday, and it was better than expected. So at the end of the day, good news is bad news for the Fed, and that transforms into bigger rate hikes, obviously. So at the end of the day, they're still expecting jobs report for today. Right. There's still that tendency that it might come out better than expected. So we're already seeing so which is still bad news for all the rate hikes we've seen in 2022. So at the end of the day, investors are still quite cautious, but they want to get into these markets, into these risk assets. It's so obvious because they're watching every move that the Fed makes at this time. So watching out for that jobs report data coming out today. We'll see how the markets react to that. But back here, the NGX did snap the winning streak. Yesterday, we had a loss yesterday over 1%. So obviously some profit taken there, but still the best performing stock market in 2022. That's the NGX. And
I join you. I join you in saluting that. Thanks, Laddie. Of course, that report that Laddie referenced is coming out during the course of the day. We will, of course, be following it closely, and Laddie and the team will bring you the import of that. What does it say, and what are its implications in the coming hours? Thanks, Laddie. And let's just take a quick look at some of the other stories before we go. a Nobel Peace Prize laureate Iles Bialyatsky went on trial in Belarus yesterday, facing up to 12 years in jail in a case his allies see as a political retribution for his rights work. Video showed the co-founder of the Vyazna human rights group sitting in a court behind bars as proceedings took place. The 60-year-old is one of the most prominent of hundreds of Belarusians who were jailed during a violent crackdown on anti-government protests that erupted in the summer of 2020. Bialyatsky, who shared the Nobel Peace Prize with Russian rights group Memorial and Ukraine's Center for Civil Liberties in October, was arrested in 2021 along with two co-workers from Vyazna. And now to bilateral issues. Chinese leader Xi Jinping and his Philippine counterpart Ferdinand Marcos Jr. have agreed to strengthen economic ties and resume talks on oil exploration as they look to revive their economies amidst the pandemic downturn and friction over contested areas of the South China Sea. Mr. Xi met with Marcos Jr. on earlier this week during the Philippine president's first state visit to Beijing, where the two leaders agreed to appropriately manage differences. According to a joint statement, both leaders had an in-depth and candid discussion about the situation in the South China Sea and reaffirmed the importance of maintaining and promoting peace and stability in the region. During the talks, Manila and Beijing also agreed to resume negotiations on oil and gas exploration in the South China Sea that were halted last June due to constitutional challenges and issues of sovereignty. And just before we go, a final story, this time on sports. Tennis Australia is to stand by its decision to allow Russian and Belarusian players to compete at the upcoming Australian Open in the face of demands from the Ukrainian ambassador in Australia to implement a ban. A statement from Tennis Australia said players from Russia and Belarus are only able to compete in international tennis events as individuals and without flags or country recognition, which will be the case for Australian Open 2023. Tennis Australia stands united with the international governing bodies of tennis, the Grand Slams, the ATP and WTA tours, and the ITF in its condemnation of Russia's actions and its unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. In 2022, Wimbledon banned all Russian and Belarusian players from competing in any guise as a result of the invasion. The 2023 Australian Open runs from January the 16th through January the 29th. That's where we wrap up the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akiri Doluale. Do have yourselves a pleasant day and weekend ahead. Good morning.